McCulloch versus Maryland was a Supreme Court case taking place on February 23rd through March 3rd, and the final decision was made on March 6th of 1819. Now, this whole case came about because the federal government was taking taxes, and they needed a place to put all the money, so they created federal banks. These guys. But in one of the states, Maryland, they decided that they didn't want this because the federal banks were taking over these state banks and putting them out of business. Okay, so Maryland put big taxes on the federal banks to try to run them out of business. But a man named James W. McCulloch, who was the head of the Baltimore branch of this bank, the National Bank, refused to pay these taxes, okay, because it was wrong, not good. Now, the whole court case was arguing the necessary and proper clause, which is Article 1, Section 8 of the U.S. Constitution. Section 8. And it states that the government can make laws and do certain things that aren't explicitly expressed in the Constitution as long as they are necessary and proper, meaning that they can't just make a law that says the federal government gets half of everybody's paycheck. That's wrong. It's not necessary. It doesn't need to be done. Now, another thing that was being argued was the Supremacy Clause, which is Article 6, Section 2. Okay, and this says that the Constitution is the highest law in the land. Highest law, and that if, say, a state ruling like Maryland conflicts with the Constitution always wins, right? Always wins. Okay, now, who won in this case, right? Who won? Well, the Supreme Court, in a unanimous decision, decided that McCulloch won the case. Okay, this means that the states, in this case Maryland, can no longer put taxes on the national bank, which is why we have national banks today, right? Now, I know some of you thinking, right, this is pretty irrelevant. But it actually helped to define the boundaries for not only the state governments, but also the federal government, right? Define boundaries. Right? Now, this is important because at this point, the U.S. is only 43, right? And in the scope of things, so it's only 43 years old. In the scope of things, it's still pretty young. It's still a baby, right? You know, it's still getting used to what's going on in the confines of the Constitution. It's still getting used to working within those confines. Now, this has been a lot, right? One huge history lesson. That's actually wrong because it may not have any large impact on society or anything, but it still is relevant today. Excuse me. Now, had McCulloch not set out to fight the government, it's likely that the mailing system, right, would be very different. Why? Because USPS is a federal institution, right? It's federal, okay? And McCulloch, this guy over here, argued that the state cannot mess with the federal institution, right? They can't mess with these guys. So all this to say that the Supreme Court did just correctly, right? They did a great job in this case. It was very just, because several of the things that we have today, like the banks and postal service, are the way they are now are around because of this decision.